close to the same, but they switched one seat. There's a seat down near San Antonio that had gone Republican in a special election a few years ago, and it's expected that that seat would switch from Republican to Democrat, and it did. Pete Flores lost his race. That's significant. So we go from 1912 in the Senate to 1813 in the Senate. You say, well, what's the big deal? That's significant because the Senate had, as of last session, what they call a 3/5 rule. You used to have 2/3 votes to bring up a bill in the Senate. When the Republicans lost their 2/3 majority, Dan Patrick lowered that to 3/5. So I'm not a mathematician, but 19 out of 31, it was just over 3/5. Now that it's dropped to 1813, that's only about 58%. So you've got an interesting situation in the Senate where Republicans don't have an automatic 3/5 majority to bring up the bill. So I think that's actually a good thing. It's going to force both parties to work a little more closely together in the Senate. The Senate, for us local governments, has been a terrible place the last couple of sessions because the bad bills for us came flying out of there like a Pez dispenser. I mean, there was no stopping it. There was no hearings that were significant. There was nothing. So I think it's going to be good in the Senate that we've got a little bit more bipartisanship. So some of those bad bills are going to need one vote from the Democrats to come out. That doesn't mean they're not going to find it. If that's the breakdown of the bill. Now there's also rumor, though, that given that 3/5 threshold was no longer met, that Dan Patrick might do away with that and just go to a 16-vote majority, which they can do by rule. We don't know if that's going to happen. I hope it doesn't happen. I think having a little bit of a supermajority is good, regardless of what your politics are. Again, we're not sure what kind of access we're going to have. It's possible that only journalists will be allowed in the Capitol. That's going to be really interesting. How many of y'all have started having public hearings for your city, your county, or your school district by Zoom or by video? Y'all started it? Has turnout been up? We're hearing anecdotally across the state that that's actually working pretty well for cities. The turnout is up, and the House and the Senate are actually kind of, I think, afraid of that. They don't want their committee hearings to be open to the public. They don't want anybody sitting in their living room and, Muleshoe, Texas, being able to zoom in and speak for 3 minutes on their bills. So it's possible that won't happen, and you literally won't have public hearings. We'll see what happens. I think you'll be able to listen in, but whether the public will get to testify either in person or not is up in the air. That's not good for local governments, to not have that access. And we'll talk in a minute about legislation that would do away with local government advocacy altogether. So that's going to be a problem as well. Bill filing started last week, and I'm going to tell you some of the interesting bills in a moment. There's over 700 bills filed so far. The rumor was that because of coronavirus, every legislator was going to be limited to 12 bills. Well, that rule hadn't been put into effect yet, and so when pre-filing started last week, all the legislators panicked and all filed many more than 12 bills. So we've got a record number of bill filing 1 weekend of over 700 bills. What are the trends so far? Well, obviously coronavirus is one. Dozens and dozens of bills affecting health care, open meetings, those type of things. We'll talk about some of those in a moment. The other trend, and I was mentioning this to some folks at dinner last night, is marijuana. This is not a city issue, but boy, I've never seen so many marijuana bills filed in my life. I told Scott last night, I think we're 2 sessions away from legalized marijuana in Texas. That's just the trend that's happening. If you look at kind of the politics of the states that legalized marijuana this year and where we're headed, believe it or not, 5 years ago I would say Texas would never legalize marijuana. I think it's happening. Medical marijuana bills have been filed, and we're not seeing them just from Democrats. We're seeing them from Democrats and Republicans. There's just a trend towards that. And my prediction is, again, it's not a city issue per se, but I think that's where we're headed. So coronavirus, marijuana, are kind of the trends of the bills that we're seeing so far. This session, if we have one that lasts the whole session, what I mean by that is there's also a rumor in Austin that they're going to gavel in on January 12th and then gavel out immediately and go home for at least a month or 2. The plan being to come back and do nothing but the budget. That's one of the rumors they're talking about. There's a lot of fear in the House. The House is a crowded place. You've got a lot of House members that are nervous about the coronavirus and don't want to be there. So the number one issue that they have to pass is a budget, and it's going to be a doozy. State tax revenues are in the tank. They're terrible. The Comptroller Hager reported a few weeks ago that the state already starts out with a $5 billion deficit relative to where they thought they were going to be before coronavirus. Another problem is House Bill 3. Where's my school folks? I met at school, gentlemen. House Bill 3 put a lot of new money into schools. The problem is it's putting a lot more money than they thought would go in there due to some formulas. I read an article this morning that they're already almost $400 million ahead or behind, depending on how you look at it, in terms of the amount of money that House Bill 3 has already obligated. So they've got to pay that on top of the $5 billion deficit. So where do they make that up? I have no idea. House Bill 3 was a big promise. That was putting a lot of new money into schools to reduce recapture. And I don't think the political will is out there to back away from that. I think they've got to fund that, plus they got to fund the additional $5 billion. So balancing the budget is going to be really, really tough this session, and it's going to be a close call whether they do that. So the budget is the first thing. The next thing is redistricting. The problem is the census numbers are so late in coming in that they're not going to be available in time to do the redistricting piece in the spring session. That guarantees that there will be at least one special session next summer. So if you work at the Capitol or have anything to do with cancel your summer plans, I know I have, is we're going to have at least one special. The other rumor is that they would have a very shortened regular session, work on just the budget, and then have a series of special sessions to handle individual topics, things like redistricting, coronavirus, and other issues. So we could be in session stretching all the way through 2021, which from a local government perspective is a bad idea. The more often those folks are in Austin, the more trouble they could get into. Talk a little bit about some of the bills we've seen filed and some of the bills we're rooting for. One of the things TML has decided very recently in our committees to back is extending the ability of cities, counties, and school districts to meet by video. So if you take away coronavirus, think about how convenient it is if you're out of town or you can't make it for a council member to be able to zoom in to a meeting. You recall that before the governor suspended those rules, it was really, really difficult for a city to have a video meeting. You had to jump through a bunch of hoops. It was almost impossible. And so there's a push now to extend the relaxation of those open meetings rules permanently. We've already got a sponsor for that bill, Senator Paxton, up in this area. She says she's interested in carrying that bill, and I think there'll be some support for that. I think the newspapers and the open government groups will push back a little bit against that, but I think there's a lot to be said for it. I live in Austin, and we had a budget hearing for the city council, and over 500 people participated by Zoom. And even in a hyper-political town like Austin, that was a huge turnout. So you're actually seeing more turnout for public hearings because of that issue. So I think it's a possibility that those open meetings laws get extended indefinitely, those exceptions for video meetings. Let's talk about some of the bills that we've seen filed so far. House Bill 233 by Representative Murr would exempt cities who's under 25,000 population there, in which cities? Roanoke is, anybody over 25,000? All right, good news for y'all. This bill, House Bill 233 by Murr, would exempt all cities under 25,000 from the restrictions of the bad building materials bill from last session, House Bill 2439. Y'all remember this bill? This is the one that said cities can't regulate anything to do with exterior building materials. Terrible idea. And it was so, interestingly, that bill was carried by Dave Phelan, who's now the speaker. So we've got to kind of tread carefully on how we address that. But Representative Murr believes that smaller cities will be impacted by this probably more than large cities. What it basically says is if you have a brick neighborhood and a house burns down, someone could build a house out of 10 because that's authorized by the international building codes. And when we pointed that out during the hearing, the chairman of the committee said, "Oh, that won't happen. The market will take care of it. No one will do anything with their home that's not up to market." Right. I said, "Have you ever met your neighbors? Sometimes they do things just to spite you." And so this would be a big break if we could get that population bracket. I'd like to see it for all cities, but it's a good start to do cities under 25,000. House Bill 34 by Representative Canales is one of several bills that would make an automatic presumption that your police and firefighters got coronavirus on the job if they got coronavirus, which has big implications for workers' comp. So our risk pool, the TML risk pool, is already treating first responder coronavirus as a presumption, but it's not in the law. We're doing that as kind of a courtesy. I think that's what our members want, but these bills would put it into law. And I think you're going to see some long-term workers' comp claims coming out of coronavirus. We just don't know how that's going to play out. Sort of a trial lawyer lobby that works on these issues is very interested in what are the long-term effects and what can we do from a workers' comp indemnity type of workers' comp. House Bill 35 is a terrible bill by Representative Swanson. It would do two things. It would require a 25% turnout for all bond elections, cities, counties, and schools. Now, in the most recent, all you guys that had your elections moved to November, that wasn't a big deal. You had 50, 75% turnout. But when we get to go back to May elections, you don't get 20. I don't think you get anywhere close to it. Am I wrong about that? Nobody gets 25% turnout. So that's not going to be good. And also would move a separate provision of that bill would move all elections permanently to November. How many of y'all had May elections normally that you had to move to November this year? Most of us. You know, there's some cities that love November elections, and they changed years ago, and that's fine. Most cities appreciate having the May election day to themselves. In fact, if you go back when Holly and I started, we used to have 4 uniform election dates that you could pick from. We lost 2 of those, and now we're down to just May and November, and there is a push to get rid of that. And it goes hand in hand with a bad trend, and that is bills that would try to politicize cities and school boards. You guys run, my county friends, you guys have to pick put an R or E next to your name, even though I joke with county judges, is your jail a Republican jail or a Democratic jail? And they laugh and they say, well, it's not. The same thing's true for cities, but there's been legislation filed the last 2 sessions related to this very issue that would make mayors, council members run partisan. And it's a terrible idea. What y'all do, 99% of what cities do, and I would say school boards are the same way, and counties are actually the same way, has nothing to do with whether you're Republican or Democrat. And it just sort of complicates the whole issue to add politics on top of it. So we're going to see that legislation again, and this bill would move the elections to November. The thinking is then it kind of gets you in that same partisan mix, and eventually you'll just have to put a letter next to your name. Terrible idea if you ask me. No matter what your politics are, it's best to be nonpartisan at the city level. House Bill 330 by Representative Kane is another bad debt bill. This one says you have to get a 2/3 vote to pass any bond. That's kind of, lights out for most bond issues. They're pretty close. Yes, sir.
Of the public, 2/3 of the public?
2/3 of the vote. It doesn't have, it's not a turnout issue, it's not a threshold issue, it's just once the vote comes in, 2/3 have to be in favor of passing the bond. So that's not very viable. There's going to be 2 big bills on police reform. They're both, there's a House bill and the Senate bill. House Bill 88 by Representative Thompson, Senate Bill 161. These are both called the George Floyd Act bills. I think police reform, for obvious reasons, is going to be a topic of discussion this session. TML is fairly neutral on it. We have cities on both sides of the issue, and the general consensus is leave it local, don't have state mandates on us, but these bills will get some looks. What the features of the bill, one of the key features that they're talking about now is banning arrests for Class C misdemeanors. So that's something that if you haven't talked to your police chief about that, visit with them. Chiefs hate it. They don't typically arrest folks for Class C misdemeanors, but the option gives them more tools in their toolbox. When an encounter goes south or something, they can do that. In fact, several years ago, TML helped take a case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Lago Vista case, it was what they call the soccer mom case. There was a lady that refused to use her seatbelt or put her kids in the seatbelt. So she was driving around Lago Vista with the kids in the Suburban, kind of flying around, and got several warnings, and they ultimately arrested her for seatbelt violations, which is a Class C misdemeanor. And went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court affirmed that you can, in fact, arrest people for Class C misdemeanors. And so this bill and others like it would overturn that. So talk to your chiefs about that. Let us know what your city's position is on some of those issues. A lot of cities already do some of the things in that bill. The bill would ban chokeholds and other things. Most cities have police policies that don't allow that. but it would make it statewide. So I'm interested in your feedback on that. You can tell me in a few moments when we take questions, but that's kind of something that we're on the fence on at this point. Like I said, a lot of marijuana bills. Police chiefs are a TML affiliate. They hate legalized marijuana. They think it's, you know, a gateway drug and a stepping stone to crime. They may be right, but you're going to see a lot of police, not police so much, but police chief opposition to those marijuana bills. Lots of bills that would change voting procedures, both directions. I wonder why. We just had an interesting and contentious election. I suppose we're still kind of litigating it to some degree. So you're seeing a lot of bills that would expand mail-in voting in Texas. Texas has one of the narrower statutes for mail-in. You have to be, you have to show a certain age or a disability to supposedly get a ballot. We've seen bills that would say that if you have a kid in the car, you can make the election clerk come out to your car and bring the machine out to the car, so drive-in voting, that type of thing. We have bills that would make universal mail-in voting available to Texans. We have bills that would cancel mail-in voting, so it's just coming from all over the place. But election bills are going to be a big deal this session for obvious reasons. House Bill 528 by Representative White would be a 3.5% appraisal cap on commercial property. Right now, commercial property has no cap on appraisals. Homesteads have a 10% cap. So White's bill, House Bill 528, would take commercial property down to 3.5%, and he's got a separate bill, 529, that would take the homestead cap from 10% down to 2.5%. This is a bad idea, because what it does is it really depresses the real estate market. And as proof of that is California. California has a 3% appraisal cap back since the days of Prop 13. What happens is when you buy a house, you're frozen at that level of taxes, essentially. 3% is not that much. And then when you try to sell it, the new owner has to pay full taxes. The appraised value pops up to market value. And it's really tough on the real estate market. California also has a commercial appraisal cap, and that's trouble as well. Y'all ever been out to LA and driven around and noticed, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but if you've ever driven around LA, all the shopping centers and grocery stores look like they're still out of the 60s. You notice that? The reason for that is Prop 13, because if you remodel your commercial facilities, your appraised value jumps up to market value. So one of the weird side effects is nobody remodels their strip centers in California. That's kind of a little known fact. But those bills would not be very good. There's been bills that would attack the governor's authority over disasters. This is going to be huge. You know, early on in coronavirus, we thought the big issue would be city authority, and you know the state would rein us in. Well, early on, the governor kind of gave us a lot of authority, and then he took it all over and made all the shutdowns a factor of his own orders, and that sort of drew more fire than local control did from critics both to his left and to his right. And so we're seeing bills now, including one by Representative Springer, who is a Republican and was in the mix to become Speaker. He's got two bills. One of them would put an automatic sunset date on any governor disaster declaration, so it couldn't be ongoing. And the second would be a mandatory special session of the legislature every time the governor declares a statewide disaster.
Wow.
So there's a lot of pushback, and interestingly, it's coming more from the governor's right than it is from his left, challenging his authority. And you all have seen this, you know, you've read about it, and critics of what he's done. So you're going to see a lot of talk back and forth. I think more about what the governor can do versus what we can do as cities. We kind of, when the governor sort of took over, we kind of escaped some of that fire because cities are just like, well, it's in the governor's hands now. And that was probably eventually the way to go, to have sort of uniform rules about it. And I hesitate to say that. I'm usually, cities know best, but when you have a statewide pandemic, it probably, to the governor's credit, probably made sense for him to take some of that political heat and impose rules. And it's worked for the most part, but he's getting a lot of criticism about that. So we're going to see those bills. Question?
Yes, I'm sorry, could you repeat that, the second one that you said, the second bill?
The second bill would be House Bill HJR 15 would be the mandatory special session, and then House Bill 173 would be the automatic sunset date on any disaster declaration.
Those both for Springer?
Those are both Springer bills. Now, the big issue from a local government perspective is, the good news, we haven't seen this bill filed yet, but we know it's coming. is going to be a repeat of Senate Bill 29. Senate Bill 29 was the bill that prohibits, schools got dropped out of it at the last moment, it prohibits cities and counties from hiring folks to advocate for them in Austin, and prohibits you from joining an organization, aka TML or Texas Association of Counties, if that organization lobbies in Austin. Well, that's one of the reasons you joined TML. That's the reason cities formed TML in 1913. We would still be in business. We would just put on an annual conference, and I'd come speak to you every once in a while, but I couldn't go advocate for you at the Capitol. It's a terrible idea. When that bill was filed, Senate Bill 29, I was visiting with a senator who supported it. That bill flew out of the Senate, by the way, last session, which was pretty alarming. And I was telling her, I said, remember the Denton fracking bill from 3 sessions ago, House Bill 40? As soon as that bill got filed, the bill author brought TML and the Texas Oil and Gas Association in the room and said, y'all work this out. I want to compromise on this bill. And we both did. We had a compromise that wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. And I said to that senator, I said, if you ever carried such a bill, if Senate Bill 29 were to pass, who would negotiate that bill for you? And she said, oh, it's no problem. I just asked my mayor to come do it. I said, well, your mayor is one of 1,200 mayors in Texas. How can your mayor speak for the other 11? Oh, we work it out. It wouldn't be a problem. And so there's a real feeling that the only people advocating for cities and counties and school districts ought to be the elected officials from those boards, as if y'all have nothing to do. You could drop everything, drive down to Austin, be at hearings all day long. It doesn't work that way. The bigger problem is just figuring out what's going on. Our friends in Austin file up to 7,500 bills every session. And one of our jobs at TML and Texas Association of Counties is literally just to read those bills. It takes me about 1,000 hours every session to read those bills. And you guys are busy being mayors and council members, doing whatever you do as mayor and council members. You don't even have time to keep up with it. But that's what that bill would do. It prohibits you from joining an association that advocates for you. I think Senate Bill 29 will be back in some format. But the good news is I think coronavirus has worked to our advantage politically, because we've worked really closely with the governor's office, we've worked closely with FEMA, with TDMS, other state agencies on your behalf, and we've gotten a lot of credit for that. I mean, the state understands that cities need help, that our association's there to help you. So I think the message can be, let's put this off. Let's don't, in the middle of a pandemic, let's don't silence the organizations that represent cities and counties. It would be a pretty crass thing to do and bad for our constituents. But I think that bill will be back. Like I said, it passed the Senate with flying colors, came over in the House and died on a floor vote, about 80-65. And so it was close. The votes are still not there. Remember, I told you nothing changed in the House. It's the same breakdown. But Dave Phelan, our new speaker, did vote for that bill. But Dennis Bonham was a big advocate for that bill. So we're hoping that even though Phelan voted for that bill, it won't be on his list of priorities. We're hoping. We don't know yet. We've got some feelers out there at his office. We know a lot of our folks know his staff very well. We know him pretty well. And so we're going to find out if that's on his list of priorities. I hope it is not. So I've kind of covered sort of the big issues. I'll tell you one thing won't be back is probably revenue caps, because the Senate Bill 2 passed last session. I get the question, you cities under 30,000, that's still most of y'all, right? We're largely unaffected by Senate Bill 2, and the question I get is there a push to lower that cap or eliminate that cap? And I don't think so at this point. I think the fiscal problems of coronavirus on the state and on cities is going to protect us, at least this session, from expanding Senate Bill 2. We did a survey at TML, interestingly, the way that bill was written, in order to get Senate Bill 2 passed, they had to put a clause in there that the 3.5% cap goes away during a statewide disaster. Well, guess what we just had? We're in the middle of a statewide disaster. And Senator Bennett said, well, that's not what we intended. We didn't mean pandemics, we meant hurricanes. Well, the way disaster is defined in state law includes epidemics. It's right in there in the statute, and he got mad at us for telling y'all that. But we did a survey. Almost no cities took advantage of that exception. The vast majority of cities, over 90% of cities, stayed below 3.5% this year. And over 50% stayed below 0% on their increase over the effective rate. So the good news is cities and I assume counties are in the same situation. Local governments behave responsibly in light of Senate Bill 2. So I think that insulates us a little bit, at least for now, for expanding that to include other cities, the smaller cities. So I've covered kind of the big issues, Senate Bill 29, revenue caps, appraisal caps. Got plenty of time for questions. Yes, sir.
So you've referenced several times in your talk coronavirus-related things, but that's a pretty broad topic. So what types of things are the bills that would address coronavirus or something like it?
Well, not that many that address the virus itself, but I lumped in there the open meetings extension,
Okay.
the attacks on the governor's disaster authority, that type of thing. So just kind of anything that sort of stemmed from the virus, all those issues came up. The state doesn't actually have a huge role in addressing the virus itself. There's big questions about rollout of the vaccine when that comes. I think that's going to need some legislation, but we haven't seen that stuff filed yet. Other questions? Yes?
Is empowering Texans, are they up or are they going down?
I think their influence is waning a little bit. It's on the way down. Their people aren't getting elected like they hoped, and that's their main driving force. Their folks in the House are the so-called Freedom Caucus, and people are dropping out of the Freedom Caucus more so than they're joining. So I'd say their influence is on the way down, but they're still out there.
Are they calling themselves something different though? Because I kind of heard that too, that they were kind of, it was still Empower Texas, but they were going under a new name, so they were, you know.
Maybe they have. Maybe they have. You know, the truth is they're financed by a West Texas oil billionaire, and he's still got his billions, even though the oil's not doing well. So they're always going to be there, but their hold on the House is kind of loosening, which is, I think, for the good for most local governments. You know, they're so far out there to be critical of your new Republican speaker says you're kind of a little further to the right than most folks. So I would say their influence is on the way down. Yes, sir.
Will we see any changes on annexation?
Yes. I forgot to mention that. There is a bill, and I skipped right over it. No, it hadn't been filed yet, but we've got a commitment from Representative Shine and Senator Seliger to help us fix one bad technical aspect of the annexation bill from last session, from the last two sessions. But the problem that those bills had, in addition to making annexation difficult generally, was it made it almost impossible to annex across a state highway because TxDOT just reflexively doesn't consent to annexations. Even if they don't have any problem with it, they're not consenting. So we've got commitments from two legislators to fix that problem, to presume that TxDOT consents to annexation. Now, the broader question is, when are we going to roll back the big problems with those two bills? I don't see it happening this session. And generally speaking, we lost unilateral annexation authority. So you can't just annex folks that don't want to be annexed. That is going to take some time to fix. I think we've got to point out the purpose of annexation, why it was there, and compare ourselves to, you know, northern cities, the Detroits, the Philadelphias, who lost their annexation authority 30 years ago, and the problems that's caused the cities. So no, I don't think we're going to get a big fix on annexation this session, but I do think we're going to get that technical fix that has stymied a lot of cities since that bill passed. Scott?
Have you heard anything on the internet sourcing, sales tax sourcing?
Yeah, that bill hadn't been filed. The question is the internet sales tax sourcing bill. This is going to be a big. There's talk about a big switch in how we source goods that are kind of coming out of warehouses and so forth, versus, you know, bought in a storefront. And that bill has not been filed yet, but I think it will. And this is, the controller is pushing for this, and he's got some pull. So I suspect you'll see that bill, but it has not been filed as of yet.
So what is his push? What is his angle?
The angle is when you have goods that that you purchase on the internet, but they're not coming out of the town where you purchased them. They're coming from a third source. He wants to shift the sourcing of local sales tax to the destination city instead of the origin city. Now, that's already the case for goods that are coming in from out of state. So if you're getting taxes on Amazon goods that are coming from, Phoenix or something, you have no choice but to source them to where the consumer is. But traditionally in Texas, we have what we call origin sourcing, all the way back to the catalog days. So if you order a washing machine from, a store in Dallas and it gets shipped to Roanoke, Dallas gets the sales taxes. This change is it's kind of complicated. It's not every sale, but if it's done on an online marketplace, they call it, that would switch that. In that case, Roanoke would get the sales taxes. Now that's good for some cities, depending on the sale, and it's bad for some cities. So we have been instructed by our membership to stay strictly neutral on that bill. TML will not take a position, we never have on sales tax sourcing issue. But we will inform you what's happening on those bills. But it could be a big shift of sales taxes from city to city, from county to county, that type of
So online sourcing is Amazon, Wayfair, Target, Walmart?
Correct.
Okay.
So-
But it affects way more than
Those are the
that.
Yeah.
marketplaces.
Those are the
that
marketplaces.
you're talking about. But
The
there's-
marketplaces, those are examples
Correct.
that you're talking about, okay.
But there are some warehouses and things like that that are considered places of business that aren't in that market definition that
Right.
currently are going to one city because they are a place of business. And if the change is, everything's gonna be destination based now, which I have heard that there's thought there because it's just easier. We're just gonna make it all destination based, potentially devastate some cities' budgets
It could hurt some cities.
Benefits others.
and benefits
It
others.
benefits others.
What's it do though with
I don't care about
that?
that.
Yeah, the other piece of that too is a lot of cities, have done economic development incentives with those companies to get them there. And so what happens with those when you can't meet your obligations on your incentives that you've given? Because you gave those incentives and those were blessed by the AG when we did those incentives.
Yeah.
So now what happens with them?
Well, the truth is Glenn Hager, who's really good, overall is good for cities and counties, he's a good guy. But Glenn does not like those economic development incentives based on sales taxes. He for some reason doesn't like it when you get 380 grants or other incentives based on sales taxes. So he doesn't have a problem with doing away with that piece of that incentive. Now, there's some talk that when the bill gets filed, that it will grandfather existing 380 agreements that have sales tax in there to help you get past that hump. But it would just be a temporary grandfathering. There is talk to do away with those. I don't know why there's, hatred's a strong word. I don't know why there's such suspicion of sales tax economic development agreements, but there is in Glenn's office. And that's just the way he feels about it. And I don't think he's going to change his mind about that. But this is his bill. It just hadn't been filed. Good question. What else? Yes?
Have you heard any other new sources of revenue? Anybody talking about where we're gonna get money to dig out of this?
It's a good question. No, I haven't heard where they're just talking about cuts at this point. There's no real talk of new tax. Now, marijuana would have some revenue associated with it. Every marijuana bill, whether it's coming from the right or the left, has a tax to it. So I don't know how much money pot generates. I'm not an expert, but you can call Colorado and see. I think it's pretty significant.
Huge. Oklahoma.
But no, there's not much talk of that. There's been a couple of bills filed so far, and I'm sorry I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, that would expand the sales tax base to include things like poly engineering services and others. Those bills don't have much of a chance. Each of those economies has their own lobbyists, and they're not going to let them be subject to sales tax. So I don't put a lot of faith in those bills passing. Architects, lawyers, I'm a lawyer, but there's talk about putting all of those industries under sales tax, but I don't think those bills have a chance. So no, there's not a big push for new revenue. There'll probably be more cuts. The problem is, like I said, they spent so much political capital on House Bill 3, that school funding bill, that I don't think they can renege on that at this time. I think they've got to honor the principles of House Bill 3. Yes.
Do we know who that's positively affected? Because we're in Northwest ISD with our kids, and they're gonna be like 25 million short or some huge number short based on the funding changes. So your fast-growing larger districts that had to pay into Robin Hood are now short. Who saw the positivity out of it, I guess is my question.
I'm not an expert on school funding, but my understanding is it reduced recapture by about a third. So if you were a donor district, I suppose that helped you a bit. But there's all these formulas in there that kept people whole. So supposedly nobody lost any money in it, and some cities gained, some school districts gained. But it's a little beyond my.
Not our district.
Not your district.
They didn't reduce the recapture, so that was one of the problems. And we had a BTRE that didn't pass, that we rolled back.
So we're trying to figure out the $25 million cuts she was talking about.
I'm sorry, I'm a city guy, and school finance just flies over my
No,
head.
it's been interesting because of the way that they had to couch some of it with the bonds and stuff to try to figure out how to make up the difference, so.
Yes, sir.
So, they don't want us to have a association lobby, they don't wanna do online, meetings. Their committee meetings, sometimes they call them hour, 2 hours in advance, and all these mayors who have jobs and careers and families have got to break the last minute. I'm trying not to be cynical, but it's almost like they don't wanna hear from us.
Oh, they don't call House committee meetings on an hour or two notice. They sometimes call them on 5 minutes notice. That's why TML, I've got an office that we keep shuttered most of the year, but we have an office right next to the Capitol. Because what we do is at the end of the House deliberations of the day, say, the committee on such and such will meet at my desk in 10 minutes. So we have to throw on our sports coat and run over there. And sometimes we'll show up at those meetings. And one time I showed up, I got there in about 4 minutes, and the chairman said, "What are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here." Literally, it was an open public hearing, but he didn't think anybody could get there in time. I said, "Well, I ran over here." Funny story. Remember a few years ago, there was somebody at the Capitol that fired a handgun in the air. It didn't hurt anybody. But that's when they put in the metal detectors. And to get around the metal detector, you could have a handgun license. That would get you around. This is when I became executive director of the 2011 session. And the problem with the metal detectors is the Capitol, there's these busloads full of kids that come do tours, and that issue of us being able to get over there in time to be at a hearing was off the table. So we had a training at the TML for handgun license, and all the lobbyists in Austin came to our training. We had a packed house, and we all got our handgun license. And then Dewhurst, Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst, heard about that, and he was kind of embarrassed that this was happening, that all the lobbyists were getting their handgun license to get around the metal detector. So he threatened a rule that not only must you have a handgun license, you must actually be packing heat. At the time, you had to show that you had your 6-shooter to get around the metal detector. And my lobbyist at the time, Shanna Igo, was kind of a firebrand. She said, "Does that mean I get to carry a gun in the Capitol?" I said, "No, because you'll use it." So he dropped that rule. And I'll finish the story. But one other funny thing happened is I got my handgun license. And at the time, if you ever got pulled over by the police, you had to show both your ID, your driver's license, and your handgun license. That's not the case anymore. But I was on 130 at Toll Road. I guess I was speeding a little bit. The trooper pulled me over, and I forgot to hand him my handgun license. He went back to his car and then came back. Said, "Mr. Sandlin, are you carrying your handgun with you today?" And I was like, "I don't own a gun." And I said, "No, sir, I don't have a gun." He said, "Well, why do you have a handgun license?" And I said, "Well, it's a true story." I said, "Well, officer, it's a long story." And he goes, "Oh, you're a lobbyist, aren't you?" And he gave me a warning, so I got it. But to answer, let's get back to your original question. You aren't being cynical. They don't want to hear from you. And coronavirus, not even having to have hearings, is a perfect situation for them to get stuff done without having input from anyone. And it's not as if we succeeded on Senate Bill 2. Why are they trying to silence us? It's not like TML's handing out campaign contributions or always winning on every issue. We don't. We just have, all we offer in terms of our lobbying is information and argument. And they don't even want to hear that. And so you're right. The deck is going to be stacked against us if that bill passes. I've got a feeling that it's unconstitutional. So I think if that bill ever passed, there will be some legal challenges. You know, if corporations are people, you know, I think local governments have First Amendment rights as well. And so I think there's going to be a challenge, but I don't want to get to that point. I don't want to have to rely on the Supreme Court to tell us that we can have influence on your behalf.
They'll probably still put schools back into it too, if they bring it back through, right?
Yeah, they had dropped schools out at the last minute, and they had all kinds of population brackets, and I can't even remember how the final bill would have been, but I know schools were spared. I bet they come back in, and I bet it starts out with everybody. And so that's our most frightening bill we're facing in session. Yeah, Mike?
Bennett, on these bills you're talking about where they're wanting to expand early voting legislation, is that so they can start seeing how many votes they need to finish the count? Or is it actually expanding it for people, we still keep the controls in place?
No, it's actually expanding it so that everybody can get, that requests it can get an early vote ballot, or mail-in ballot.
But due by a certain date.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we keep the control in there where they can't start adding ballots after election day.
I haven't seen that bill been filed yet. There's no push for that I'm aware of.
Okay.
It would still be due the same due date, but it would just be anybody could request one.
Okay.
You know, you had a situation in Houston where the county judges there, when a county judge ordered everybody to get a mail-in ballot, and the Supreme Court blocked that. So what these bills would do would overturn that and say anybody can get a mail-in ballot that wants it. You don't have to claim that you're ill or see yourself.
But by request.
By request.
Not by sending out either live ballots or sending out a blanket.
I haven't seen that bill filed yet, but it could happen. You have some states that do that routinely.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other questions, comments? Did I depress y'all enough? Breakfast? Thank y'all for having me. Call us at TML anytime if you have questions. Talk to the police chiefs about that one issue I talked to you about, the police reform, because we don't really know how cities are feeling about that. And any other questions, you just give me a call this week or next week. We'll have to talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Hey, Susan, I never saw the signing sheet, never made it around, so.
Did it get held up, the sign-in sheet?
I've got everybody, I checked everybody out.
Oh, okay. So that means Sally.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Sally.
Yes. Okay, so for the minutes, last meeting, we had a planning session, and it was not very many of us here. We just started kind of talking a little bit, some framework around where we want to go for 2021, so more to come on that, but there was no formal business for approval, so no minutes. Financials, Jim, did you want to talk about the financials? They're in your packet.
No, they're in the packet. Anybody has any questions?
It has the Q3 and then the year-to-date, so I will say that we're in a positive, which is not normal, year-to-date. So I think that's, one of the positive results of COVID. But it does have the 2021 budget on there, and I noticed, next year we'll go into it with a negative, so that positive would help
So
with
they
it.
need an approval on the
Yeah.
report of financials and approval
Okay.
on the budget.
So let's, on the 2020, any questions? Okay.
I move approval of the 2020
Okay.
budget, or financial report.
Do you have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, 2021, any questions?
I move approval of the 2021 proposed budget.
Second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, well, we got through that. Next on the agenda is the board nominations for 2021. So for chair-elect, we have Holly Graymore, City of Roanoke, for
Actually, she'll
the,
be the chair.
oh, sorry, chair, that's a typo.
Sorry.
Yeah, typo. I was like, wait a minute, she was the chair-elect this year.
Touch base.
Chair-elect will be Mercedes Boland from Hillwood. We're proposing Kristen Coomer from Weir and Associates for the secretary. Lucky her, gets to take notes. Jim Patterson for treasurer, no surprise. Jeff Ackerson from Charles Schwab as a director position. He's agreed to take that on, which is great. And then we'll have an open, there's an open position for an elected official because at the time when the board met, we were in between elections and everything. So any nominations or volunteers for that spot? We would like to keep an elected official in there in order to balance out the board between the private sector and the public.
Nick, where's our new mayor?
She's in Paris.
Oh, okay. Do
So
you have
I
an
would,
interest in doing this?
Have not talked to her about that, but I would nominate Greg Lamont, who is Mayor Pro Tem, for Trophy Club and was just reelected to a 3-year term and is interested in serving.
Oh, well, there you go. That's okay, so let's put
And I don't know if I
him,
can
and we'll vote,
nominate
or we're gonna vote on this, right, Sally? When we,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And then I'll be the past chair, so,
I'll second that.
okay. So all in favor?
Scooter, I'm on that.
I seen if Greg was gonna oppose it, he hadn't said anything.
Scooter. You want it?
No, put Greg in.
Give you a chance.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, we have our new 2021 board. Okay, elected officials reports, no one here from Michael Burgess' office or Senator Jay Nelson that I see. Senator Kelly Hancock's not here.
Sam Ellis here and nobody from our delegation is here.
I know, right?
Yeah, what's up with that?
Am I being cynical again?
Geo's office, Tan Parker's, Matt Kraus.
Gary Fickus is here.
Gary Fickus, we're all the way down to the bottom almost, but we would love to hear from Gary Fickus. We would love to hear from Gary Fickus.
It's coronavirus all the time, every day. You know, the county is experiencing, record numbers, the last couple of weeks, and, I have no clue when it's gonna slow down. Judge Whitley continues to talk, not necessarily at our meetings, but to the press about issues that everybody assumes we're talking about at Commissioner's Court. And, things like, stopping all sports, youth sports, he doesn't have the authority. Lockdowns, we don't have the authority. Mask, we do have the authority. And, but, he is, trying to have some kind of conversation with the governor's office, as probably the other 253 judges in Texas are trying to have from all the other counties, and are probably not having any better luck than we're having in getting any kind of answers out of the governor. Other than I did see yesterday, maybe the governor said there will not be a Texas lockdown. So, but coronavirus is raging through Tarrant County. Our hospitals are, like, I know that 2 weeks ago, JPS had 42, 43 patients. This week, 2 weeks later, they're pushing 100 coronavirus patients. Deaths are still happening, obviously, but not at the rate they were probably happening back in the summer. We think a lot of the people who are testing positive are probably are younger. The deaths are still in the population that is over 60 and with underlying conditions. So, and that's probably going to continue. The vaccine situation, who knows? I personally don't think that you, me, are going to be able to get in line and get a vaccine probably at the earliest, sometime maybe in the spring. Just the numbers that they've got to produce. You hear 50 million, you hear 1 billion. Well, global population is whatever, 8 billion, however many billion. This is a global issue. It's going to have to be solved on a global scale. So I think we're going to be here with it for a while. Certainly it wouldn't surprise me if a year from now we're maybe getting close to being out of it. a number of people get vaccinated, and, you know, of course, if we do have a new president, then it will then become his vaccine, and it'll be acceptable to everybody to take. Versus, you know, being Trump's vaccine, it would not be acceptable, so, so we'll.
Same vaccine.
Well, yeah, well, I understand, but, so, we'll just have to, I think, we gotta wait this out. It's gonna continue to wreak havoc on our economy, I think. I would not be surprised at all if restaurants get scaled back, bars closed. You know, they have grouped us into areas now, and you have to reach a positivity rate of 15%, I believe, for your, and we're in a 6-7 county area, which, you know, includes all of our major counties. And right now, we're at, that rate is 14, pushing 14, somewhere in there. It's right at 15, so we're almost there. If that happens, restaurants go back to 50%, bars close.
How about schools?
No, I don't, no. The Texas, the head guy with the schools in the state, whatever his title is, he was quoted as saying that the schools are not the problem. So, anyway, that's primarily all we deal with now is that and 2 hours of people hollering at us because they have to wear a mask. So,
Yes, Nick.
My statement is gonna be facetious, but I just want to say it. I'm looking for investors to help start a company that's gonna create dry ice shipping, because to ship all of, one of the vaccines requires to be shipped in super cold area. I see a business opportunity that they're gonna need shipping containers that hold dry ice, and maybe you manufacture ice. I don't know anything about it, but, you know, it keeps ice cream cold, so.
Gary, I got a question for you. Is the county, are you guys looking at quite a number of layoffs, or what's that?
we have not laid anybody off. For whatever it's worth, we've had a tremendous number of people retire, head people, department heads retire, effective the end of the year. So, but no, we haven't done any layoffs. We still have some people. My office, since March, for 2 weeks, we were closed. 2 weeks later, we opened and we let people, we always had people in the office, but we kind of rotated people in and out, they could work from home. In June, we went full-time in the office. I'm not a big believer in working at home, unless we have to. This week, we went back to rotating people in and out because of the heavy numbers of virus. Now, we have not had anyone, an employee in the building in Hurst, which we house about 100 people there. We have not had an employee in that building come down with coronavirus. Now, we've had family members who have come down, and we've had employees who have had to quarantine because their daughter, somebody, you know, caught it, but they haven't themselves caught it. So, and we watch that pretty closely, and we have a lot of protective things we're doing, you know, with the plastic shields and you know, we got masks. You cannot come in the building without a mask on, except during voting. You could vote without a mask. There's laws against requiring masks for voting.
So Gary, just some feedback, you know, the AEC industry had to reduce workforce by, on average, 10 to 12% across the board. That's what, you know, hearing from colleagues, our own firm, that's a global number. It's not, you know, just local to Texas, but I think you're right. The schools and the businesses are doing everything in their power to have all the protocols in place. The problem is you know, like our office, we've had several COVID cases, and it's the economic impact when you have to shut down in the middle of the day and exit that number of employees that are back at the office, and everybody's got to grab laptops, drop everything, and you're in the middle of business meetings and things like that. It's been pretty devastating. So with the number increase, our office is going to be closed till December 3rd to come up with a better plan and adjust the work from home. But, you know, architecture, engineering firms, they want people back in the office. You know, there's softwares that you've got to use. You know, we're impacted by the internet, but and the schools, to your point, there's all these rumors that Judge Whitley's going to shut down sports, and I hear it every day. I get this.
Judge Whitley doesn't have the authority
No,
to
right.
shut down sports, and he knows it.
And he knows
He's
it.
just saying that that is something that needs to be considered.
Considered.
And because he thinks that he's got grandkids, he goes to a lot of their stuff, and nobody's wearing a mask.
Right.
And of course, everybody's outside.
Yeah.
But nobody's wearing a mask. And
Yep.
and Judge Whitley pretty much won't, you know, he's very leery of going to any kind of luncheon meetings where people are not wearing masks. If everybody wears a mask, he'll come, but if they don't, he won't.
Yeah, there's definitely still an attitude in the air that this isn't real, don't need to wear a mask. And it's not happening in the businesses, in the schools, it's in the social time.
I get some of the most bizarre emails. I got one. It talked about, this whole thing was part of the book of Revelations. and then we have all these numbering sequences, and this thing went on for 3 pages, and it made absolutely no sense whatsoever. But it's the reason why we have this pandemic, and, you know, okay.
How can we as business leaders and officials help support
I
what you
think
guys are going
explain
through? I
the
mean, that's
importance
tough.
of trying to wear a mask, wash your hands, don't get in big crowds, social distance, we'll get through this. If you ignore all that, we're not. And, do masks help? You know, I had somebody explain it to me, it's like a cyclone fence trying to stop a snowstorm. Okay? And it may be, but they help some.
They help some.
They may not be perfect, and they're not
Right.
perfect. We know that.
Right.
So, but.
I was with a guy yesterday that's Little Bob's laying in, and they've got capacity to do 10 million vaccines a day. The Army, they got a contract from the Army and the U.S. government probably 7 or 8 years ago, built a facility. They supposedly have 100 million vaccines already made. The issue is you have 72 hours to get them from that facility in somebody's body. And that's the Pfizer one. The other one that's come out recently doesn't have that issue. But it's a logistics issue right now, and the comment was, does the Army get them, do the senators, who gets them? And the other question was, when you do get vaccines, how are you going to regulate, are you going to regulate, like for schools? If you don't have the vaccine, you can't come to school. If you want to file America, you can't file unless you have your vaccine papers. All those different things that are going to come up is going to create a bunch of other headaches. And I don't know what y'all are looking at, from the cities or anything else, like, you know, it's going to be a bunch of issues. Go ahead.
I just want to put in a plug for those people who have had tested positive and did have symptoms for coronavirus, or if you know of someone, to volunteer to give plasma, convalescent plasma. I've given it 4 times. I met a lady just the other night whose husband was to the point, was in the hospital, been there 14 days, was to the point of, we have nothing else we can do unless we can find plasma that we can treat him with, or he goes on the respirator. And they know that respirator isn't the best thing to do, but they don't have a choice if they're going to live. And they found someone who was a donor. It is by blood type, so that's the complexity of it. It takes about an hour. Carter Blood Care will set you up. They're in desperate need of it. The demand is much higher than giving. For the most part, it's no different than giving blood. It is slightly different. But if you know of someone who did have symptoms, if you want to go get a antibody test and you test positive for antibodies, for sure they can use it. But they are in desperate need of convalescent plasma. So if you can give, please do so.
That's a good point, Nick. And Gary, you mentioned the hospitals getting full. I heard someone make a miscomment, a business person, that, you know, the deaths are going down and the hospital, you know, and I said, that's, you know, you've really been misinformed because the hospitals are full. My cousin's a respiratory therapist, 2 different hospitals here locally, and she said it's the most depressing thing to go to work every day. And I mean, she's working 12-hour shifts, and she said the beds are full, and there's certain areas that you have to keep the COVID patients in. So it's full consistently. So that's definitely is a true fact. It's not the hospital rate is not going down; it's going up, and they're the stress on these you know, healthcare folks. It's just more than some of them can bear to go home at night. So. Tough.
Can I bring a bit of optimism?
Yeah. Please.
No, and people in this room we know have been touched by this already. Mm-hmm. So it is very real, and appreciate the input. On the other side, I've been buried in a ton of webinars over the last month. This Operation Warp Speed, forget who's president, but he will not be remembered for this. As I was sharing with the commissioner earlier, there is massive discoveries that have come about because of them dumping the full force of government, lifting regulations, time restrictions, all that. This is going to have a long-term payback, huge, and into the way that the Genome Project is now going to allow us to identify. We already knew what a coronavirus was. This was a new coronavirus. And so the fact is that they can see now with what they have learned in record time to do this. Literally within a matter of this decade, the minute you see a virus, they will be able to type it and get the vaccine that fast. But not only in just coronaviruses, but also they're looking, cancer's big on this. Mm-hmm. Everything that has to do with autoimmune defense. They've discovered some massive things here. So the bad is we have to be very patient and very respective of this problem right now. But let's keep the eye on the ball that this is probably going to be a hidden, what do they call it, silver lining in this cloud right now.
You're right.
I get from our public health guy, Vinny Tenacia, every morning at 8 o'clock or 7:30, I get the number of cases that were reported yesterday.
Right.
This morning, or yesterday, 1,891 cases. Yesterday, we got the report for the day before was 2,112. So today is 1,891, 1,900 cases. 7 deaths. I think yesterday we had 9 deaths, which in relation to the numbers are not that many.
And that's really those that are going to get tested.
Yeah,
There are a lot that aren't gonna go and get tested.
Right.
So that's just those that are being tested.
Well, and Sally, you brought up the schools. I will say the schools are some of them are pre-planning. They just moved ours at CISD to the third 9 weeks for optional virtual learning. So we've extended ours, but originally it was, you're coming back January 4th, period. You know, this is it. And then they just had a school board meeting this week, and we just got the email to extend all the way into the spring. So I think they're preparing, like you said, it's not going to be a fix anytime short term. You had a comment, Kristen?
Well, my husband was part of the Pfizer. He took the trial, and they're still doing trials. So if anybody is willing to take the vaccine, I can get you the information to go into the Pfizer trial. They pay $1,000 for you to stick the needle in your arm, which I was like, what are you doing? But
you could have got the placebo, right?
Well, right, you don't know which one to get, but his second vaccine, they do it in a 2 vaccine shot, and the second one put him in bed for the entire next day. So we're pretty sure he probably got the original vaccine. I don't think
Strong
saline
placebo,
does that. I don't think saline solution does
Or
that.
says something about his mind.
Yeah. But they're still looking for people, and they're moving it down to age 16 and up. So if anybody wants that information, reach out to me. I can forward it to you. But my brother works in the other end of it, building the tests, and he was telling me that they're launching within all of the Walgreens nationwide. There's now going to be a 5-minute test that does flu, coronavirus, and pneumonia, I think, all with one blood prick into a machine. So that's all on the launch right now. It's being put into the retail facilities as we speak. So
There's also a home test that's coming out.
Yeah.
Test yourself.
yeah, so there's quite a bit going on the testing side as well that may help us. But you know, you have to look at how many people are getting tested as well.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of why we look like we have such huge numbers in America versus Europe, because we're actually testing everybody and they make.
And Gary, just on a positive note, your senior centers in this area have done an amazing job of controlling this. And my mom's over here at Harbor Chase in South Lake, and they had a small breakout, and I just knew, I was like, I'm never gonna see my mom again. You know, this is it, because she's got so many health issues. And they contained it so fast. It was amazing. And so now we're, you know, one caretaker's allowed in, which is why I work from home, which is why my son is a virtual learner. And we're super strict, but it's pretty fantastic to be able to go in. We make appointments, which is a little odd, but to be able to sit 6 feet at least from your parent with a mask on. And we've been doing this ever since the governor opened it up. And we haven't had another breakout in that facility. So they've done a fantastic, the training. So that's a positive thing that's been really healthy for the seniors. But we're gonna end up finishing early with all of that. And I thought it was good to have some open dialogue. We haven't gotten to see each other. And Gary, we're thinking about you guys down in the county and all your hate mails. And it's, anything we can do to help you defend in the public, we will try to do so. And I'll make sure that my football player is informed that Judge Whitley's not trying to take away his football season, so he can report that back to his football players. You can say, my mom heard it straight from County Commissioner Fickus. The next meeting, any other announcements? Anybody have any announcements that weren't on the agenda? The next meeting, so no December meeting, so we get a break. I know I'm taking all of my PTO for Thanksgiving and Christmas. I'm looking forward to no Zoom calls. Our next meeting won't be till January 21st. Speaker to be determined. Holly will be our new chair. And I hope we're working on our business planning right now and our budget, so I can't make any promises that certain membership fees and things will get moved forward, but certainly all businesses are impacted right now, and I'm happy to see the budget where it's at this year.